Welcome to Life Stories, where we bring you heartfelt tales of resilience, transformation, and hope. Today's story takes us on an incredible journey of a woman who faced heartbreak and humiliation but found the courage to rebuild her life. From the pain of betrayal to the discovery of self-love and purpose. This is a tale of strength and new beginnings. Stay with us as we follow Emily's inspiring path to freedom, healing, and love. Don't forget to subscribe to our channel to begin today's story and never miss more uplifting stories like this one. The ballroom was dazzling that evening. A scene pulled straight from a fairy tale. The crystal chandeliers hung high, their glittering lights reflecting off polished floors. As the soft hum of classical music filled every corner, laughter echoed through the space, blending with the clinking of glasses and murmured conversations. It should have been a night to remember, a moment to celebrate life and love. But for me, it was anything but. I stood near the edge of the room, clutching my wine glass tightly. The smile on my face was rehearsed, the product of hours spent in front of my bedroom mirror earlier that day. After months of emotional distance from Jason, I had pinned my hopes on this evening, foolishly believing it could serve as a bridge between us. I had chosen my dress with care, an elegant navy gown Jason had once complimented years ago. I had hoped it might remind him of who I was, of the love we had shared. But from the moment we entered, it was clear I didn't exist in Jason's world that night. He swept through the room with practiced ease, his handshakes firm, his laugh loud and confident. He basked in the attention, feeding on the admiration of friends and acquaintances. Meanwhile, I lingered in the background, a wallflower in my own marriage. I watched him weave his charm through the crowd, every smile and witty remark earning him another cheer or laugh. I felt invisible. My presence next to him seemed to mean so little. But when Jason finally approached, glass in hand and that arrogant smirk I had come to dread, I felt a flicker of hope. No matter how small, perhaps he would offer a kind word or a simple gesture, a sign that I still mattered. Miraculous, isn't it? Jason began, his voice low but laced with that familiar edge. That you managed to come tonight without complaining? His words pierced me. I swallowed hard, keeping my face neutral, unwilling to let the crowd see the pain swelling inside me. I wanted to respond, to defend myself, but I remained silent. I knew from experience that anything I said would only make things worse. Jason wasn't finished. Moments later, he stepped onto an impromptu stage, tapping the microphone for attention. The room quieted, and all eyes turned toward him. My heart raced. Maybe he would redeem himself, say something thoughtful or kind about us. About me. I held my breath, willing him to surprise me. But Jason's idea of a toast was crueler than I could have imagined. With a mocking smile, he thanked everyone for coming, then launched into a speech about marriage, his tone light, almost playful, as if he were delivering a stand-up routine. Marriage isn't easy, folks, he said, his eyes scanning the crowd. Especially when your wife forgets to be attractive. A ripple of laughter spread through the room. Awkward but audible. I felt as though the air had been sucked out of my lungs. Jason continued, unbothered by the discomfort he was causing. I mean, look at this dress, he added, gesturing in my direction. She acts like she's still 20. The laughter grew, this time with more conviction, as if his words had granted the room permission to indulge in my humiliation. My face burned. I could feel the heat rising up my neck, my chest tightening with every chuckle that echoed around me. I tried to steady myself, but my hands trembled. The glass of wine I held suddenly felt unbearably heavy. Jason didn't stop there. With a tone as sharp as broken glass, he made one last jab, his voice tinged with malicious glee. Let's be honest, he said. No sane man would want someone who's withering away. Not even me. The laughter around me hit like a physical blow, each laugh an echo of Jason's betrayal. I wanted to scream, to shout back at him. to make him feel the same pain he was inflicting on me. But my voice wouldn't come. I could only stand there, frozen, as the crowd's amusement washed over me. Finally, I couldn't take it anymore. Placing my wine glass on the nearest table, I turned on my heel and walked toward the exit. My legs felt like lead, but I forced them to move, step by agonizing step. My chest heaved with the effort of holding back tears, but they spilled as soon as I passed through the grand doors and into the cool night air. I didn't stop walking. I couldn't. The further I moved from that room, the lighter I felt, though the pain in my chest refused to fade. I arrived at my mother's house just as the moonlight cast long shadows on the quiet streets of Chicago. My footsteps echoed on the pavement, the city indifferent to the storm raging inside me. When my mother opened the door, her face filled with worry as she took me in, my red-rimmed eyes, my trembling shoulders. She didn't ask questions. She simply pulled me into her arms, holding me as I finally let go of the unbearable weight I had been carrying for far too long. That night, I sat at the kitchen table, a cup of tea warming my hands as silent tears streamed down my face. It wasn't just my husband I had lost. I had lost my dignity, my self-respect, and the dreams I had once held so tightly. As the first rays of sunlight filtered through the curtains the next morning, I knew one thing for certain: my life could not continue as it was. Something had to change. But how? That I wasn't yet sure. The morning after the party, I awoke with a dull ache in my chest. The sunlight filtered through the thin curtains in my mother's cozy Chicago kitchen, bathing the room in soft light. The smell of freshly brewed coffee filled the air, but it did little to soothe the heaviness in my heart. I sat there at the table, staring at my hands wrapped around the warmth of the mug, unsure of how to start putting the pieces of my life back together. My mother, Joanne, moved quietly around the kitchen, her presence steady and comforting. She didn't press me for answers or urge me to speak. She just waited, knowing I would find my voice when I was ready. Finally, with a trembling breath, I broke the silence. "I never thought Jason would humiliate me like that," I said, my voice barely above a whisper. Joanne set down the coffee pot and took a seat across from me, her expression a mixture of concern and quiet strength. "Emily," she began softly, "you've spent far too long living to please that man. It's time to start thinking about yourself." Her words struck me like a jolt of electricity. For years, I had twisted myself into someone I thought Jason wanted me to be, suppressing my own needs and desires. And for what? A marriage that left me invisible, belittled, and broken. Later that day, as I moved through my mother's house, I stumbled upon a familiar box tucked away in a corner closet. Inside was my old sewing machine, its once shiny surface dulled by years of neglect. I traced my fingers over the metal, memories flooding back. Before Jason, before the endless compromises and sacrifices, I had dreams. I had wanted to design clothes, to create something uniquely mine. That dream had been buried long ago, overshadowed by a marriage that demanded too much and gave back so little. I decided to take the sewing machine out, determined to see if I still had the touch. My hands were clumsy at first, the stitches uneven and awkward. But as I worked, something shifted inside me. The rhythm of the machine, the feel of fabric under my fingers, it was as if I were stitching together the fragments of myself that Jason had torn apart. Each small success, each seam completed, felt like a tiny step forward. One afternoon, as I sat at the dining room table working on a simple dress pattern, a chance encounter changed everything. I had gone to a nearby cafe to clear my head, the hum of conversation and the aroma of coffee grounding me in the moment. That's when I met Ryan. He was sitting a few tables away, engrossed in a book. When our eyes met, something about his calm demeanor and warm smile drew me in. We struck up a conversation, and for the first time in what felt like forever, I felt seen. Truly seen. Not as a wife or a woman who had been left shattered, but as a person with dreams, ideas, and worth. Ryan had a way of listening that made me feel safe, as though every word I spoke mattered. He wasn't pushy or overbearing. Instead, he offered a quiet support that felt genuine and grounding. I didn't tell him everything that day, but I shared enough for him to understand I was in the middle of rebuilding my life. He didn't judge or offer unsolicited advice. He simply encouraged me to keep going. Over the next few weeks, Ryan and I began to cross paths more frequently. Sometimes, he would drop by the cafe with a fresh cup of coffee for me, or we'd talk briefly about life and passions. I found myself opening up to him in a way I hadn't with anyone else. It wasn't romantic, not yet. It was something more fragile, more essential: trust. At home, the sewing machine became my sanctuary. I began sketching designs and experimenting with fabrics, finding joy in the small victories of creation. My mother noticed the change in me. "It's good to see you smile again," she said one evening, her voice tinged with relief. I hadn't realized how far I had come, but her words made me pause. For the first time, I felt a spark of hope. Jason's shadow still loomed in the background of my mind, but it no longer defined me. I wasn't the same Emily who had walked out of that ballroom with tears streaming down her face. Slowly, I was beginning to rediscover the woman I had been before him, a woman with dreams, talents, and strength. And as Ryan's presence grew more consistent in my life, I began to believe that perhaps the future could hold something beautiful after all. The decision to confront Jason wasn't one I took lightly. It had simmered in my mind for weeks, born from the realization that the wounds he left would never heal until I faced him one last time. My sewing projects had become my sanctuary, my sketches and stitches reflecting a woman slowly piecing her life back together. But to truly move forward, I needed closure. The idea came to me while I was organizing my mother's small workshop. I paused, staring at the rows of fabric and the faint dust motes dancing in the sunlight. Jason had humiliated me in public, leaving me to walk away in shame. If I was to sever the chains of our toxic marriage, I would do it on my own terms and in a way that left no room for his manipulative games. I decided to host a party. It would be grand, elegant, and deliberate, a stage not for Jason to control but for me to reclaim. The thought of standing in front of a crowd, exposing our fractured marriage, filled me with equal parts terror and resolve. I wasn't seeking revenge. This was about liberation, about leaving behind a version of myself who had allowed his cruelty to define her. I confided my plan to Ryan one evening over coffee. He listened without interrupting, his brow furrowed with concern. "Are you sure this is what you need?" he asked gently. Confronting him like this might stir up old wounds. I appreciated his caution, but my answer was resolute. "This isn't about him anymore," I replied. "It's about me." Ryan didn't press further. Instead, he promised to support me, standing by my side if I needed him. His quiet confidence in my strength steadied me, and I began preparing for the evening that would change everything. The night of the party arrived faster than I anticipated. I wore a dress I had designed myself, a deep emerald green gown that hugged my figure and radiated confidence. It wasn't just a dress, it was a declaration of the woman I had become. As I stood in front of the mirror, my heart raced. But the reflection staring back was different. This wasn't the same Emily who had fled Jason's cruel words. This Emily was strong, determined, and ready to take back her narrative. The venue buzzed with energy as guests arrived, their laughter and chatter filling the space. Jason was among them, his charm on full display as he greeted old acquaintances. When our eyes met, his smile faltered for a moment before he approached, exuding the same false warmth I had once fallen for. "Emily," he said, taking my hand, "you look different." "I am," I replied simply, pulling my hand back. He didn't know what to make of my confidence, and I didn't give him time to figure it out. I moved through the room, greeting guests with genuine warmth, feeling the weight of my purpose settle firmly on my shoulders. When the moment came, Jason decided to step into the spotlight. Of course. He couldn't resist. He raised a glass, calling for attention. To my wife, he began, his tone dripping with mock sincerity. The woman who's always had a knack for surprising me. I could feel the room tense as he prepared to launch into one of his usual humiliating anecdotes. But before he could continue, I stepped forward, my heels clicking against the polished floor as I approached the microphone. The crowd fell silent, their curiosity palpable. "Thank you, Jason," I said, my voice steady. "But I think it's my turn to say a few words." He froze, his confident facade cracking ever so slightly. I turned to the guests, looking each of them in the eye as I began. "For years, I lived in silence," I said. "I endured what many of you saw but chose to ignore: cruelty, humiliation, and betrayal. Tonight, I'm breaking that silence." The room was still, save for the faint rustle of someone shifting uncomfortably. I didn't stop. I shared the truth about Jason's infidelity, his public mockery, and the years I had spent shrinking myself to fit his expectations. I spoke with a calmness that surprised even me, my words slicing through the air with quiet power. Jason's face turned pale. He tried to interrupt, but I held up a hand, silencing him. "This isn't about you anymore," I said firmly. "It's about me reclaiming my life." When I finished, the room was silent, the weight of my words hanging heavy in the air. I set the microphone down, turning toward the exit. But before I left, I made one final gesture. I called Ryan forward, and he joined me, his presence a beacon of support and hope. As we walked out together, I felt the last remnants of Jason's control shatter. This was my moment, my liberation, and I would never look back. Leaving that party felt like shedding an old, suffocating skin. The night air wrapped around me like a balm, and for the first time in years, I felt free. As Ryan and I walked away from the crowd, I squeezed his hand, a silent gesture of gratitude for his unwavering presence. He didn't need to say anything. The soft smile he gave me as he opened the car door spoke volumes. It wasn't just a physical exit from the venue, it was a step toward a new beginning. In the days that followed, I felt a mixture of relief and uncertainty. I had faced Jason and reclaimed my voice. But now, the question loomed: what next? I couldn't remain in the same place, surrounded by memories of a life that no longer belonged to me. Ryan suggested a change of scenery. "How about Portland?" he asked one evening over dinner. "It's creative, vibrant, perfect for someone like you." The idea thrilled and terrified me. A new city meant a fresh start, but it also meant leaving the familiar behind. My mother, Joanne, was supportive but hesitant. "Are you sure you're ready for such a big step?" she asked. Her eyes filled with concern as we packed up my belongings. "I have to be," I replied with quiet determination. I knew staying would keep me tethered to the past. Portland represented possibility, a chance to rewrite my story on my own terms. The move was a whirlwind. Ryan and I found a small apartment in a neighborhood filled with tree-lined streets, quirky cafes, and bustling local markets. It wasn't luxurious, but it was ours, a space where I could finally breathe freely. Ryan was a steady anchor during the transition. He helped unpack boxes, hung curtains, and even assembled the sewing station I had envisioned in the corner of our living room. His presence wasn't overbearing or intrusive. He gave me room to settle into this new chapter while quietly supporting me from the sidelines. The sewing workshop became my sanctuary. The hum of the machine, the feel of fabric between my fingers, it was therapy. A tangible reminder that I was capable of creating something beautiful from nothing. At first, my work was simple: hemming pants, altering dresses, making curtains for the neighbors. But as word spread about my designs, requests started pouring in for custom pieces. Ryan was my biggest cheerleader. often walking in with coffee in hand and sitting nearby as I worked. "You're amazing," he would say, his voice filled with awe as he watched me bring a sketch to life. For years, Jason had made me feel small, as though my dreams were inconsequential. With Ryan, I felt celebrated, seen, and respected. Despite the progress, the shadows of my past occasionally crept in. Late at night, as I worked alone in the glow of a desk lamp, Jason's voice would echo in my mind, his cruel words, his belittling laughter. But those moments no longer held the same power. I would remind myself of how far I'd come, of the life I was building brick by brick. Each stitch I sewed felt like another piece of armor, another step away from the person I used to be. One afternoon, as I adjusted the hem on a custom dress, Ryan walked in with a playful grin. "You're going to need a bigger space soon," he said, gesturing to the fabric rolls spilling out of storage bins. I laughed, but the thought lingered. He was right. My little workshop had grown beyond what I'd imagined. I began to dream of opening a proper studio, a place where I could display my designs and connect with the community. Our days in Portland were simple but fulfilling. Ryan and I would spend mornings strolling through the local market, afternoons working side by side, and evenings cooking dinner together in our tiny kitchen. It wasn't glamorous, but it was genuine. For the first time in years, I felt like I was living, not just surviving. The turning point came one evening as we sat on the balcony, the city lights twinkling below us. "Do you realize how far you've come?" Ryan asked, his voice soft. I turned to him, surprised. "You've built something incredible, Emily. Not just the workshop, but yourself." His words stayed with me long after he'd fallen asleep. In the quiet stillness of the night, I allowed myself to feel pride, not in spite of my past but because of how I had overcome it. I had walked through fire and emerged stronger, braver, and more determined than ever. The workshop wasn't just a business. It was a symbol of my transformation. Proof that I was capable of thriving, not merely existing. As I lay in bed that night, listening to Ryan's steady breathing, I realized I wasn't just building a new life. I was reclaiming the one I had always deserved. While my life in Portland blossomed, Jason's world crumbled. I heard bits and pieces through mutual acquaintances, though I never sought out the information. It seemed the cracks in his perfect facade had widened after our confrontation, leaving him exposed in ways he never imagined. The young dancer he had so publicly flaunted his supposed fresh start had quickly grown tired of him. Their whirlwind romance, built on shallow thrills and Jason's overinflated sense of charm, fizzled out like a firework. She left him, unapologetically, for someone else, taking with her whatever fleeting admiration she had once felt. Jason was left behind, clutching at the remnants of his life, trying to salvage the image he had so carefully cultivated. At first, he tried to reach out to me. It began with messages, short and overly casual, as if we were old friends catching up. "Hope you're doing well," one read. Another simply said, "Thinking of you." When I didn't respond, his attempts grew more desperate. He called late at night, his voice strained, asking if we could meet to talk things through. I never answered. Each message, each call, only reaffirmed what I already knew. Jason wasn't sorry for what he had done. He was sorry for what he had lost. He missed the control, the convenience of a wife who molded herself to his needs, not the woman I truly was. In his frustration, Jason began showing up unannounced. One evening, as I was preparing an order in my workshop, I heard a knock at the door. Opening it, I found him standing there, his once confident posture replaced by a haggard desperation. "Emily," he said, his voice cracking slightly, "we need to talk." I crossed my arms, leaning against the doorframe. "There's nothing left to talk about, Jason." He frowned, his gaze darting around the room as if searching for some sign of hesitation in me. "You can't just throw away everything we had. I made mistakes." "Sure. But we were good together once. Don't you remember that? I stared at him, feeling a strange mixture of pity and triumph. What I remember, Jason, is a man who tore me down every chance he got. A man who humiliated me in front of people who were supposed to be our friends. That's what you gave me to hold on to. His face fell. And for a brief moment, I thought he might apologize. But instead, he shifted tactics. Is this because of him? He asked bitterly. Ryan? This has nothing to do with Ryan. I said firmly. This is about me. About finally choosing myself after years of putting you first. Jason looked as though I had slapped him. He opened his mouth to argue. But I held up a hand. You should go, Jason. There's nothing here for you anymore. As he turned and walked away, I felt no sadness. No regret, only relief. That chapter of my life was closed. And I had no intention of reopening it. Meanwhile, my world was expanding in ways I hadn't anticipated. The workshop grew busier with each passing week. Neighbors and strangers alike brought me their garments, trusting me to transform them into something unique. The joy of creation became my lifeline, a reminder of the power I held to shape my own destiny. Ryan continued to be my unwavering support. He wasn't just a partner, he was a quiet force in my life, grounding me when doubt crept in. He celebrated every small victory, from completing a complicated design to securing my first large order. With him, I felt no need to explain or prove myself. He saw me for who I was and loved me wholly. One evening, as we shared a quiet dinner at home, Ryan reached across the table, his hand covering mine. I'm proud of you, he said softly. You've built something incredible. Emily. Not just the workshop but a whole new life. His words brought tears to my eyes. Jason's voice had once been a constant reminder of my supposed inadequacies. But Ryan's was a steady reassurance that I was enough. More than enough. I had fought hard for this life. And I deserved every bit of it. Though the memories of Jason lingered like faint shadows, they no longer held power over me. Each day spent with Ryan, each stitch sewn in my workshop, widened the distance between my past and the person I was becoming. I wasn't just surviving anymore, I was thriving. Looking back, I realized Jason's downfall was inevitable. His arrogance and cruelty had left him isolated, a prisoner of his own making. But that wasn't my concern anymore. My focus was forward, on the life I was creating with Ryan and the joy I found in every small moment. For the first time in years, I felt free, and that freedom was the greatest gift of all. As the sun dipped below the horizon, casting a golden glow over the bustling streets of Portland, I sat on the balcony of our cozy apartment, Ryan by my side. The quiet hum of the city mingled with the laughter we shared, a reminder of how far I had come. My journey had been one of heartbreak, resilience, and ultimately, transformation. I was no longer defined by the shadows of my past but by the strength I had found within myself. Each step forward was a victory. Each moment with Ryan a testament to the power of love and healing. Life wasn't perfect, but it was mine, filled with purpose, joy, and a newfound sense of freedom. Thank you for joining me on this journey. If this story moved you, don't forget to like, share, and subscribe to Life Stories for more tales of resilience, love, and life-changing lessons.